So welcome everyone to this virtual plan amendment meeting. My name is Maureen Meredith. I work for the City of Austin Housing and Planning Department. If you haven't done so already, please type your name, and if you're with an organization, in the chat box. Please mute your microphone if you're joining by phone. Please turn off your video if you're participating online to save bandwidth. This meeting is being recorded and will be publicly posted to the speakupaustin.org/NPA website. If you do not want your image viewed publicly, please turn off your camera. So as you know, this property is in the University Hills Windsor Park planning area. The case number is NPA 2022-0023.03. As I mentioned earlier, I am the Plan Amendment Case Manager. Heather Chafin is the Zoning Case Manager, and this is our contact information. This slide will be repeated at the end of the presentation of the applicant. So the agenda tonight, I'll go over basic case information, guidelines for group discussion, how to participate in this process, why is there a plan amendment application, what is a future land use map. I'll do a brief presentation on the applicant's request. The applicant will give a presentation, then we will open the meeting to questions and answers. So the property address is 6305 Berkman Drive. It's 0.86 acres. This is the case number, NPA 2022-0023.03. Project name is Berkman Residential. The request is to change the future land use map from higher density single family to multifamily residential. The associated zoning case number is C14-2022-0104. The request is to change the zoning on the property from SF6 NP, which is townhome condominium zoning, to MF5 for multifamily development. The property owner applicant is Lewis Douglas D. CCL Revocable Trust, and the agent is Thrower Design, and Victoria Hasse will be the presenter. Guidelines for group discussion. Please feel free to type your questions into the chat at any time during this meeting. Please postpone general comments during the Q&A session. After staff and applicant presentations, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand by clicking on the hand symbol on the menu bar. Telephone participants will be able to speak during the Q&A session, and we will call out the last 4 digits of your phone number. Attendees will be muted upon arrival and through the staff and applicant presentations. Then staff will open the floor to answer questions in the chat or by attendees raising their hands. Similar questions may be grouped and answered together. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking for the sake of sound quality and clarity of conversation. If you're having connection issues, please turn off your video until called upon to ask your question. As I mentioned earlier, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the speakupaustin.org/NPA website tomorrow morning. You can email or call me and Heather at any time with any questions or comments that you have. If you provide written comments, they will be added to the staff case reports. You will get a notice in the mail of the date and time of the PC and City Council hearings if you live within 500 feet of the property, with instructions on how you can participate in these hearings. So why is there a plan amendment application? Neighborhood plans are adopted by City Council as amendments to the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan. The city charter requires zoning changes to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. Most neighborhood plan amendments are to a plan's future land use map, and most plan amendment cases have an associated zoning application. This map shows the areas in blue that have City Council approved neighborhood plans. Neighborhood plans include the plan document that has the vision and goals. And it also has a future land use map, which represents the vision for the neighborhood. These colors represent broad land uses. For example, single family is yellow, mixed use is brown, multifamily is orange, and the higher density single family is the goldenrod color. This map shows the property outlined in red, which has the goldenrod goldenrod color, which represents the higher density single family. And the applicant's request is for multifamily, which is the orange. This is a Google map that just shows the property and some of the surrounding uses. Here's the aerial photo. This is the future land use map, again, with the aerial photo underneath. This is the zoning map that shows the current zoning is SF6. To the north, you have the P Public where the fire station is. You have some single family to the east, single family to the south with some multifamily. To the west, you also have some single family. The Apache Austin Comprehensive Plan also adopted a growth concept map, which these various colors represent the regional centers, town centers, and neighborhood centers. This map shows the property in relation to those centers and corridors. You can see the Highland Mall station to the west, and Cameron Road is designated as an activity corridor. This map shows the property in proximity to public transportation. And that ends my presentation, and Victoria can start hers.
Okay, thank you, Maureen. Let me pull up mine. How do I guess it's which one? Okay, there we go. Okay. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Oh. Okay. So my name is Victoria Hasse, and I'm with Thrower Design, and Ron Thrower is here with me as well. And we just wanted to briefly talk about this property and to add, maybe just talk a little more specifically about what we're hoping to accomplish here. This is an aerial view of the site, much like what Maureen showed. The address is 3605 Berkman Drive. It does have frontage on Berkman and also has frontage on Hickman. And as Maureen said, it is Berkman Drive is an Imagine Austin corridor. The future land use map is higher density single family, and we are asking to amend that to multifamily, which would change the color to orange. And then with a rezoning change, the NPA would allow for a rezoning change from SF6 to MF5 is the request with the rezoning application that's also in with the city currently. So to talk a little bit about the difference between SF6 and MF5, and these are the site development regulations comparable between the two zoning districts. And what we are hoping for is to achieve more housing units on this property that fronts an Imagine Austin activity corridor. But probably what most people are interested in is the density. So when you compare SF6 density with MF5 density, you have an average density of 12.5 units allowed on per acre on an SF6 zoned acre. On an MF5 zoned acre, you would on average get about 40 units, average being 1 and 2 bedroom. And so we are asking to increase the density that is currently allowed today so that we can gain more housing. But I just wanted to call note that there are other matters that impact the number of units that can be achieved on any given site, including this one, and those are compatibility, which this property does have to abide by compatibility regulations. There's also other things like internal driveways, circulation routes, detention, water quality infrastructure, protected trees that we have to work around. So by the time you factor in all of those elements of a development, you you're never going to get to these maximum density numbers that you see. So realistically, for this particular site, we're not going to get, I mean, the site's, the site's not ever going to get 40 units per acre. And so it's going to be probably quite a bit less than that. And we've not done a full conceptual site plan at this point in time. I know a lot of neighborhoods like to request that and like to have that information, but at this point in time, we don't have that information readily available. So we're really talking very bigger picture in terms of density and use. I mean, property can achieve residential use today. It's just a matter of a lesser density of residential use versus what we're asking for with this zoning change. We are open to discussing, wanting to hear what the neighborhood's concerns are. And like I said, we haven't developed a conceptual site plan. So the idea is that whatever information the neighborhood gives us at this point in time will help us as we move forward in putting together a concept plan and site plan for the city to review ultimately down the line. So with that, that's the end of what I have to share, and I'm interested to hear what the neighborhood has to say.
So, Victoria, when I looked at the growth concept map just to double check, it did not look like Berkman was a activity corridor.
Oh, maybe, you know what? I might be getting my projects confused. I apologize.
Okay, I just wanted to clear that up.
I think what I think I was probably more talking about the Capital Metro access
Okay.
transit routes. Yeah. Sorry. Thank
Okay.
you for correcting
I
me
just
on that.
wanted to clear that up.
Yeah.
So I'm going to look to see who has their hands up. I see Lane Hicks. You want to unmute?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you. On the zoning change, I reading the MF5 zoning, it mentions this district, I mean, I'm just going to read this. This district is appropriate for high density housing and centrally located area near supporting transportation and commercial facilities. Where, I guess, this is not the most walkable part of Austin or Windsor Park. What are y'all referring to as, like, what do you think will support this density of housing in terms of commercial facilities? I already know that Cap Metro has a route along Berkman, but it is not a core transit corridor.
Yes, that's correct. At most, this site is going to get 34 units, but like I said, by the time you factor in all of those other things, it's going to be less than 34 units. And the site is almost an acre of land, and it is very conveniently located along transit. And I understand there may be a lack of walkability at this point. But the idea is that as we gain more density in the urban core areas, that will help to build out infrastructure that is desperately needed so that we can stop driving personal vehicles and having other options to get around and other uses close by that people can walk to. And I know there's some other developments going on in the area, the commercial developments. And so with Mueller not being too far away either, we do feel like this is a good area to absorb some additional density. And again, by the time you factor in all these other elements, constraints on a lot, on a site, the numbers are going to be far less than what the maximum density allows.
So follow up to that, I want to be clear. I'm all for high density development and more housing in our neighborhood. I just want to make y'all aware of the development that is coming to our neighborhood is lacking in commercial. So we're looking at potentially getting oversaturated in housing without the walkability aspect. You can't walk from Mueller even in 15 minutes from this location. It is a good like 20 to 30-minute walk.
Okay.
I think just from where I sit and I'm within 500 feet, I just don't see how this zoning change is sustainable, you know, goes along with the adjacent. It just seems very like a big change without the supporting commercial aspect available nearby within walking distance of this property.
Okay.
So after Hector, I will then go to the chat. So Hector, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm currently driving, so I'll make it brief. But there's, I believe to the south, there's an apartment complex, and to the north, there's a single-family residence. Have you guys reached out to that, particularly that resident to the north? And I have a couple of questions about that. It's have y'all reached out to the neighbors to get feedback from them? And in particular to that neighbor to the north, I believe might be one of the last remaining residential lots on that side of the street. Did you guys consider purchasing that property so that there's not kind of a single family lot left, and potentially give you guys a little bit better kind of site plan options to do something that's more compatible? The long skinny lot, just as an architect, is going to be a challenge as far as, you know, getting the access and avoiding all the trees and meeting compatibility, whereas a little bit more area might give you some better options to do something that's a little bit more sympathetic to the neighborhood. I don't know if you guys have looked at those issues.
So the landowner, interestingly, the landowner has this property has been in his family for more than 70 years. This is actually the house and property where he grew up. And so I don't know the answer to that particular question, and I can find out, but you know, this is the lot that his family has owned. And I can see where that would make a lot of sense if the lot to the north were available to combine with this lot to do a more cohesive. It would result in a better layout and I think probably a better development if that were the case. So I can find out the answer to that question about consideration for the lot to the north. But we did not reach out to that particular landowner. I apologize. My brain gets stuck on reaching out to neighborhood organizations. For some reason, that's where my brain goes automatically. And so we did have an early meeting with someone of the neighborhood planning contact team to talk about, how to move forward in meeting with the neighborhood. And I think that's why we're here. Yeah.
So going to the chat, starting at the top, I see Chuck Garner had a question. Is increased traffic congestion on an already busy single lane road with issues of two schools across from each other? ? Chuck, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. With Harris and then Wesley School at Memorial United Methodist Church, it's crazy trying to negotiate in and out of there in the morning and the afternoons. I'm really concerned about the traffic since they did a traffic study. They redid Berkman. They made room for the bus and bicycles, but cut down the room for the cars. They did put a turn lane in, which kind of helps facilitate that intersection. But you've got Windsor Village going in, which is going to really increase the density from what I can tell. You've already increased density on several other lots and built more. I don't think the area can support much more increased density, which is going to increase the traffic. So the questions that I'd put in there kind of all came back to, we keep increasing the density, which increases the vehicular traffic, and the roads are just not really good for that. And that and the school snarls and, everything else, it seems like it's just getting worse and worse. So that was my thoughts that I'll throw in there for discussion.
So something I just wanted to bring up real quick. The city of Austin just recently passed street impact fees, which means that, it used to be that developments, if they were smaller and they didn't have, if they didn't have a certain amount of trips that would trigger traffic impact analysis, then they just didn't, that just wasn't a consideration, right? It wasn't a consideration of how the project is going to impact traffic. Now that the city adopted their street impact fees, that means that all development, even, this smaller scale residential development, even if it were single family development, all development is going to have to pay into what's now called the street impact fee. And what AT does is they look at the intensity of development, and that would include the number of units and the use. And that helps them to determine what the fee will be. And those fees are to be collected and used for bringing forward transportation improvements. So while this particular development wouldn't trigger a full transportation impact analysis, which costs thousands of dollars that a traffic engineer produces, it will be assessed by street impact fees will be assessed by ATD, and those fees will go into a fund that will help put some of these transportation improvements forth in the community. And I mean, I understand, and I'm sympathetic to the concerns of traffic, and especially with schools nearby. In my neighborhood, it's very similar, and I have children that go to school, and so I get to sit in the mix of crazy traffic backups and things like that, with schools letting out at the end of the day or dropping off in the morning, and being on a busier roadway. So I do have some sympathy towards that, but I think where we want to go with this development and greater, right, is to bring more density that will pay for the infrastructure needs that can get people out of their cars and using other modes of transportation. It's going to be uncomfortable for a while, and it already is. And I understand that, but I truly believe that people don't change their habits until they get uncomfortable enough. And sometimes it takes, unfortunately, our city is trying to catch up with traffic modalities, transportation modalities, and the densities coming a lot faster than they can put those things in. So it undoubtedly, things are uncomfortable, but I think in the long run, gaining a little more density here is going to help as a whole. So,
can I make one more observation?
Absolutely.
Sure. It's great to be able to squeeze the developers to get some more money, but more money will not widen Berkman. It won't widen Briarcliff. It won't. It's just not going to do much to help that. And I understand it sounds like the city of Austin is wanting the people, I guess, to keep piling on density to the point where people feel so much pain that they're supposed to sell their cars and ride bicycles and only take the bus. But I mean, we've really increased the density already in that area, and Mueller's really going to increase it with people trying to get from Mueller to 290 to 183 to 130. It just doesn't seem there's room to fix the traffic issues, and the money I don't think is going to help. So anyway, I won't beat a dead horse. Those were my big observations. And I grew up in that. I was born and raised in that neighborhood. I, was born, moved into Hillcrest. I went to Pierce, Reagan, Blanton, LBJ. It's crazy packed with people now, and it just seems like they're looking for more ways to squeeze. And I understand that's what you're doing, squeezing more people into less space. But I just don't think there's the infrastructure. I don't think there's the way to put infrastructure in to move those people around very well. Mueller, yes, nice big roads. They took the airport, had plenty of room. You can do that. But in this neighborhood, it sounds like it's just going to pile up till they get everybody to sell their cars and walk, bike, or take a bus. So thanks for listening.
So going down the list in the questions in the chat, I see Margaret Beneman asked, is there going to traffic study? Sounds as if that was touched upon already. Margaret, did Victoria answer your question?
And Hector's had his hand up for a while too.
I know. I'm going to do the chat questions and then I'll get to the hands up. Okay, so we will move on to the chat. Will the development allow traffic to enter and exit on Hickman as well as Berkman?
Well, we haven't done a full site layout, but my assumption would be that there's a good possibility there will be access to both roadways.
Okay. So I will
and also too, something else to consider too is it's very likely Austin Fire Department, fire access is going to be a big consideration. So that's likely going to cause for 2 access points anyway. Yeah.
Okay. Actually, before we get to Hector, I'm going to ask people on the phone real quick. Person with the last 4 digits, 1515. Do you have any questions?
No, just joining right now to hear what's happening. But no, I don't have any questions.
Okay. Person on the telephone with 9494 is the last 4 digits. Do you have any questions?
Do not.
Okay. So now we will go to Hector.
Hi, just a couple of follow-up questions. On the traffic issues, would the transportation funds, I'm just thinking that the currently what we're seeing a lot on Berkman specifically is like a steady stream of cars. So there isn't, it's hard to cross because of that steady stream of cars. Like as a pedestrian, you're having to convince people to stop, or in a car, you're having to wait for an opening. Those transportation funds, or this development in particular, would it be possible to fund additional stoplights on Berkman? And then as far as like the number of units, another thing that we're seeing in the developments is kind of unrelated, is that a lot of these developments are providing a lot of studios and a lot of 1-bedrooms, but not as much kind of what we would consider like for families. They're not necessarily development for families. They're developments generally for kind of folks that are single or students or recent graduates or that kind of demographic. But if you have 2 kids, and would like to have like a 3-bedroom, for example, most of these developments are not providing that level of accommodation or unit type. So I just had a question about kind of the mix of units, and if you guys have put together kind of an idea for what you're looking to provide in this development.
So as I mentioned, well, first of all, to talk about the question about is it possible for this project, this development, to help fund like additional traffic lights, and the fees that will be collected will go towards, ATD gets to choose how those things, how the money gets spent, but they can be used on like pedestrian beacons, bicycle lanes, any other sort of improvements. It doesn't have to just be traffic lights, but it can be traffic lights as well. If they're looking and seeing that there's a need for something like that, then that's certainly something that the funding can go towards. And then to answer your question about the mix of units, we don't know that yet. So this information is good to hear from the neighborhood, that there's concerns that maybe a lot of the units y'all are seeing are smaller and there's a desire for some units that are larger and can accommodate families. I myself have 2 kids, and I can imagine, you know, it would be challenging to only have 2 bedrooms total in a unit. So I'm sympathetic to that, and it's good feedback for the landowner to consider as he moves forward with looking at the site. We're just not at the point to have that level of detail to know where the building is going to go and you know, how big the units are going to be, how many bedrooms, the square footage. We don't know any of that information yet. So this is good to get it now.
Okay, I'm going to read through the comments in the chat, then I'll go back to see if people have raised their hands. So Chuck Garner, he has, in addition to the neighborhood traffic, the increased density traffic already and the planned density increases at Windsor Village, all using limited single lane roads. The neighborhood cannot support this much of a traffic increase due to the continued density increases. Alana says, actually we did that already with the entrance exit. Amy says there's nowhere to walk for services. Lane says, to clarify my earlier statement, there are not a lot of destinations to walk to from this location. Little Deli, CVS, El Rancho, Hanks. Linda says, FYI, the developer was also born and raised in the area. He lived in the house that's been torn down on that property. Rick says, just a comment, this neighborhood very thoughtfully considered the rezoning of 100 tracts to the adoption, with the adoption of our neighborhood plan, including where additional density was acceptable. We chose appropriate zoning categories for each area. There are other properties where MF5 is appropriate, but this is not the place. So that's the end of the comments. Let me go to the people. Lane has her hand raised.
Hello, thank you again. A few things. One is, I think there was a graphic up earlier that was calling out Capitol Plaza as a Highland Park Transit Center or the Highland Mall Transit Center. I just want to
Let's see.
clarify that that's not the Highland Mall Transit Center.
Well, I may have misspoke. Highland Mall, it's the
Highland Mall
activity
Station.
center.
I don't understand what that's Capitol Plaza.
So, let me go back to, hold on one sec.
Oh, is that like the area that is served by?
Let me get back to my presentation and all. So, there's this map that was adopted with the comprehensive plan, and this is the growth concept map. And these blobs are like the regional centers, town centers, and neighborhood centers. So when you see this map, this is a Highland Mall regional center here. So that's just the edge of it. And it just shows the property in proximity to that.
Okay. So my other, I guess, question, so without a site plan, how does the developer know that they need MF5 and not MF3 or another lower density designation? Seems like it's kind of shooting for the stars without a.
Well, admittedly, MF5 is the desire, knowing that, you know, the land area calculations work out that on this size of a lot with MF5, the maximum density is 34 units. is that a realistic density? Probably not, because of compatibility and these other issues, stormwater detention ponds, those types of things. Then you also, like the other gentleman said earlier, who's an architect, looking at the site and the shape of it and the size and all of that impacts how a site can be laid out and what the actual density that is truly possible in the end. And so knowing that we're going to be constrained by a lot of these elements, asking for a higher zoning district with a greater density allows us to be able to have a little more flexibility to work around some of these matters. This basically what determines density on a property is site area calculations, and the greater density that the more intense zoning districts come with smaller site area requirements and calculations. And so that's how you're able to achieve a greater number of units. But admittedly, factoring all the other things in, it still limits the density in the end. It limits the yield quite a bit. So.
Right. I understand that. I guess I'm just, again, wondering why, this is the only MF5 in this would, if this were approved, it would be the only MF5 in the area. So it just seems like it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I am an architect. I do understand all those constraints and what actually is allowed versus what can actually get built based on the lot size and the configuration.
So I just put up this map to clarify something I said earlier. So actually the Mueller Station is red. That's the regional center. Highland Mall Station is the neighborhood center. That's the orange. It's kind of hard to tell the colors. I just wanted to
Actually,
clear.
the orange is town center.
Town center, yes. And the red is the regional. Yes.
And yellow is neighborhood center. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so where were we? The comments, Linda says, I agree with Rick. There was a single family home there, and rezone multifamily is inappropriate. Go back to people. Is it Melee? You can ask your question.
Yes. So I've actually had interactions with Ron Thrower, and he's built on smaller lots that were zoned in historic districts. And there's no reason for an MF5 to go into, it is completely inappropriate to go into this small area. He knows that he can actually rezone and ask for an MF3 or an MF2 and still accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. Like, this is just incomprehensible that someone would even allow him to be that audacious to ask for that, because you are truly not taking into consideration anything as far as impact on the neighborhood if you allow this to happen. And even it's a slap in the face, honestly, to the residents that live here, to say, let's just go ahead and we're going to allow him to build it, because you're going up, as you're including your FAR is going up from 65% to 70% from which is just ridiculous for an MF5. You're talking about all the numbers go up, which will impact every resident for any impervious cover, for the FAR cover, for the watershed, for everything else that's going in. It's incomprehensible that someone would actually have the balls to ask for that. And Ron Thrower, having built and actually worked on projects in a historic district where it is a 0.83 acre lot, and it's still, it's maddening to me. I mean, you're not even a full acre, and you're asking for all of the privileges for an MF5 in this tiny area, which is already bombarded by traffic. I'm sorry, it's just, I don't understand how you have the audacity to ask for that kind of zoning, quite honestly.
So the next person is Jackie.
Hi there. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Maureen, I had a question just following up on the Imagine Austin growth concept map. And the question is more along the lines of, I guess, the location and adjacencies to some of these higher density, like commercial, supportive type regional centers. I know, what is the city of Austin's, I guess, goals or policy from a walkability standpoint? Because I know there's, you know, for parks, for example, there's this I think it's a quarter mile, you know, I guess, distance for folks to be able to walk to a lot of these resources. Is it similar for some of these commercial centers? Because that's something that I'm curious about, especially with some of these higher density asks, is that it seems like I'm seeing these large blobs and then noticing that there's areas like our neighborhood that aren't necessarily adjacent to these really dense, you know, planned commercial growth zones. However, there's a lot of density coming into areas that are much further away. So I was curious if there was any more info or clarification on the city of Austin's goals for walkability to that stuff.
So we have a sort of checklist that we look at for the sort of synthesizing the Imagine Austin goals. Let me pull that up. So when we write our case reports, we look at this. So it says here, you know, is the property adjacent to, you know, activity centers or corridors, mobility and public transit, located 0.25 miles from public transit or light rail station. Here is, you know, how close is it? Does it have a public sidewalk? Connectivity and food access is, you know, located 0.5 miles. So 0.5 miles tends to be the ideal distance when we're analyzing a plan amendment case in conjunction with these Imagine Austin guidelines.
Okay, that's helpful. So if it's a half a mile walk for getting groceries or commercial, that type of thing, and then 0.25 miles is the ideal for public transit stops. Because I know, especially like in Windsor Park, where we had, you know, this kind of neighborhood urban center, or the potential for a neighborhood urban center, you know, having that density where you've got your resources directly below you just made perfect sense. And then so part of what we're seeing is there's a lot of potential density coming in, but it seems like it's much further away. So that was why I was curious on what those, I guess, ideal numbers were. And I think someone had made a point earlier that, you know, it's about a 30-minute walk to some of the shops and everything in Mueller. So, you know, just kind of curious to learn a little bit more about that, and if this might actually fulfill that, or it might be a little far away. So thank you for that.
Okay. Let's see. Let me go to the chat again real quick, see if anything has added. So I think we had already touched upon this, Lane. I don't think multifamily is appropriate, but I don't think multifamily is inappropriate, but I think MF5 is a big ask. People agree. Floor area ratio, MF5 is 1:1. Alana, we just had development approved for Windsor Village, 500 plus units, which increases traffic tremendously. Would it be possible to request that the city do a traffic study for blocks 5600 to 6800 Berkman and possibly redesign the street prior to approval, denial of the zoning change, as we have had our commercial options decrease tremendously in the neighborhood, and knowing we will be required to leave the neighborhood for most shopping It would be useful to know whether the city would redesign the street before adding housing units. That would be something that would happen with the zoning case when they do the transportation review. I don't know if Victoria, Ron, you want to touch on that?
I think a lot is up to ATD, really. They're the ones that say that put the requirement out there for what they need in order to review a project appropriately.
Yeah, so that might be something you can touch base with Heather Chafin, the zoning planner, to ask her what were the comments that have been received from the transportation department regarding this case. Moving on in the chat. Chuck says, if I had lived there for 70 years in my single family dwelling and was selling the property and wanted to get the very most I could and was not worried about neighborhood impact, I would push for the very highest density I could too. Lane says HEB in Mueller is 1.3 miles from this 6305 Berkman. LA says the impervious cover goes up to 70% for MF5 and height allowance of 60 feet. And MF3 has a max of 65% impervious cover and 40 feet height. To go up 20 feet is not what this street needs. Jackie says, thank you, Lane. It does seem much farther than the half mile. So let's go to people. Jackie, you're up.
I apologize. I forgot to lower my hand from before, so I don't have another question. Thank you, though.
Okay. Okay. So just a reminder, you guys, this meeting ends at 7, and I understand the Windsor Park Planning Contact Team has a meeting after this one. So we have 8 more minutes in this meeting. So go back to the chat. Hector says a massing diagram would help with this ask. I'm not personally opposed to density because I've seen our housing become unaffordable in a few years. We left California because it was not affordable. This is Austin's future without more housing. I'm going to just open the floor to anybody who wants to chime in on any questions or comments.
Okay, I do have one more comment.
Okay.
If that's okay. So I know Lane just did the calculation for the HEB Mueller being 1.3 miles. So I'm curious, in the checklist then, would this meet the requirements for the Imagine Austin plan if it's so far away or much further than the 0.5 miles for that?
So what I would do is I would not check it off on that box. And then I would total the number of yeses. And when I meet with my planning team, we will go over these types of questions. How far is it to this? How far is it to that? And we'll take other things into consideration when we make a recommendation, but that will be noted, these distances.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And as someone who developed the checklist, it's not as the crow flies. It's actually how a person or a car would go. So it's not if something's on the next block, but it's a mile and a half, 0.75 miles, then it's not in walking distance, or it's 0.5 miles, So it's not as the crow flies. I just wanted to clarify the checklist.
So thank you. Kathleen, I forgot to introduce her. She was my coworker who was helping with the meeting tonight. I apologize for not introducing her. Let's see. So Rodney, you're up next.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Maureen, and thank you, Victoria and Ron as well. I wanted to basically just ask about kind of next steps for this process. I think from tonight, you've heard that I think there are concerns about that level of intensity of MF5. So just want to leave that thought of, looking at the potential of having some sort of a lower density there. The transportation concerns are real. Our contact team is currently working with ATD to try to have a transportation mitigation report done for our neighborhood, because what I think we are seeing happening is that each one of these cases are being viewed in a vacuum, but just 2 lots over, you have another project, and then another 3 lots over, you have another project coming in, and they're not being viewed as a whole, but they're all utilizing the same road infrastructure. So I really think that is a challenge, and that's one that we're seeing for sure, kind of moving forward. So Maureen, I think one thing that might be helpful is what would be kind of your advice, or what kind of assistance could we get in trying to have that addressed from ATD? And we can connect after this call, because I know we have 4 minutes left, but just want to find out, how can we just work to make sure that that ATD is looking at the entire Windsor Park planning area, and not just 1 lot per 1 lot when they're all utilizing the same road infrastructure, and honestly, for a lot of them, the same exact road. So any input or guidance that we could get from city staff on how we can make sure that our area is being looked at as a whole, we really want to make sure that that happens.
Yeah, and I'll touch base with Heather, the zoning planner, tomorrow, but probably my answer right now would be maybe to start with her, since she knows how the transportation department works with these zoning cases and what level of review they give, and if they look, at the area overall versus lot by lot, like you said, and then how neighborhoods can go about requesting an overall neighborhood transportation study given the impact of all these different developments. And I'll talk to her tomorrow, but I also have a feeling you'll need to reach out to her as well. But I'll touch base with her tomorrow and send you an email as a starting point.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Maureen.
Okay. Okay, so we have 3 more minutes. Let me go to the chat. Blaine says there's a lot of documentation about the missing middle and housing. It would be great if this project could supply that type of housing, more dense than single family, but less dense than mid-rise. Encourage the applicant to see how to infill with this type of housing, which is more welcoming for families of different sizes.
I just want to thank everyone for participating tonight, and the feedback has been much, much appreciated. So we are going to take all of this information into consideration, and we'll be looking forward to more dialogue, if possible, with the neighborhood. So.
Okay. So I will stop recording, but I will stay on the line